Have you ever had someone try to take everything from you, including your most cherished memories? What happens when the person you trusted the most betrays you in the worst way possible? In this gripping story, Megan finds herself at the center of a battle over her father's legacy, the house he built, the memories he left behind. When her stepmother, Rebecca, tries to sell the house Megan grew up in, she thought she had already won. But little did Rebecca know, Megan wasn't going to let her father's legacy slip away without a fight. Will Megan stand her ground and protect what's rightfully hers? Or will Rebecca succeed in erasing the past? The truth is about to come out, and it's more than Rebecca bargained for. It was a Tuesday morning, and the sunlight poured through the windows of my childhood home, casting long shadows on the hardwood floors that my father had painstakingly restored over the years. I was seated at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee, the hum of my laptop filling the otherwise quiet space. The house felt still, calm, as it had always been a place where time seemed to stand still, where memories of my father lingered in every corner. The sudden buzz of my phone shattered the peaceful silence. I glanced at the screen, and my stomach tightened. It was Rebecca, my stepmother. Rebecca never called to chat. Her voice, always sharp, often carried a challenge or a barb. At 32, I had grown used to her games and manipulations, always bracing myself for whatever new stunt she'd pull. But today, something felt different. The air before a storm. I answered, keeping my tone neutral. "Hello, Rebecca." "Alice," she began, her voice dripping with smug satisfaction. "I've sold the house. The papers are signed. The new owners are moving in next week. I hope you've learned your lesson about respecting your elders." Her words hit me like a slap. My heart pounded in my chest, and I struggled to keep my voice steady. This wasn't just any house. This was my father's legacy, the house he built with his own hands, where I had lived my entire life. Each room held a story, a memory of him. And now, in one careless sentence, Rebecca was ripping it all away. "The house?" I repeated, my voice calm, yet the storm inside me was starting to brew. "You mean Dad's house?" "Don't play dumb, Alice," she snapped, her tone turning bitter. "The one you've been squatting in since your father died. That ends now. I found buyers who will appreciate the property." I could feel the bile rise in my throat, but I forced myself to remain composed. This wasn't the time to lose control. "That's interesting," I said slowly. "And you're sure everything's legal?" Her laugh echoed through the phone, full of self-assurance. "Of course it's legal. I'm his widow, and the house was in his name. You may have been his precious daughter, but I have rights." Her words stung, but they only sparked a flicker of amusement within me. She had no idea what I knew. She had no idea about the meeting I'd had with my father's lawyer, Mr. Harrison, days after the funeral. She didn't know that the house was already mine, legally protected, beyond her reach. "Don't worry about it, Rebecca," I said, my voice almost teasing. "I'm sure you got a good price for it." Her voice grew colder, but I could hear the satisfaction in her words. "Just be out by next Friday? The buyers are eager to start renovations." I smiled, though she couldn't see it. She thought she'd won, but she had no idea what was coming. I wasn't about to let her erase my father's legacy. Not without a fight. "Thanks for letting me know," I said calmly. "Goodbye, Rebecca." As I hung up the phone, a rush of relief washed over me. The battle had only just begun, and I knew one thing for sure: Rebecca had underestimated me. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the phone in my hand, the silence of the house suddenly feeling overwhelming. Rebecca's words echoed in my mind like a painful whisper, each one pulling at the edges of my heart. The house wasn't just a building, it was a part of my father. It held his essence, his soul. Every creak of the floorboards, every crack in the windows, every faded painting hanging crookedly on the wall-sit was all him. And now, it was slipping away just like him. My father had been the kind of man who could make a house a home. He'd poured his blood, sweat, and tears into every inch of this place. He restored the old banisters himself, carved the wooden details with his own hands. The stained glass windows, those beautiful, colorful works of art, had been his pride, each one telling a story, just like the walls and the rooms. We spent hours in this house, hours in the garden, in the living room, the kitchen where my mother had always been, where laughter and love lingered. But now, those memories were under threat, and I could feel the anger welling up inside me. I took a slow breath and pushed myself to my feet. The room spun as I walked through the house, my fingers brushing the walls. The house felt different, no empty, silent, as though it could sense what was happening. My father had died 2 years ago, and in those first few months I could hardly believe it. He had been my rock, my protector. It was hard to fathom that he was truly gone, leaving me with nothing but his legacy, and now, even that was in jeopardy. I walked down the hall, past the room where my father had spent most of his time working, reading, and talking to me. I could almost hear his voice, soft and steady, as if he were still here. "Alice," he'd say, "this house is more than just walls. It's where memories are made, where love is kept safe." And now Rebecca, with her cold, greedy ambition, wanted to tear it all down. I could picture her smirking, imagining herself in control, imagining that she had won, but I couldn't let her. I wouldn't. I thought back to the days after my father's funeral. The world had felt like it was spinning out of control. I was in a daze, lost in the chaos of planning his memorial, settling his estate, but there had been one person who had always been a constant, Mr. Harrison, my father's lawyer. I had met with him in his office just a few days after the funeral, sitting across from him in his cluttered space filled with legal books and family photos. The warmth in his voice had been a comfort in those early days of grief. He was a man who had known my father for years, a man who had respected him. That's when I learned the truth, something Rebecca would never understand. My father had known what she was capable of. He had seen through her act of kindness, her sweet smiles and careful words. My father wasn't naive. He'd made sure that the house, the one thing he knew I cherished most, was protected. James had explained it all to me, but it was hard to comprehend at first. The house wasn't just in my father's name. He'd set up a trust years ago, transferring the ownership of the property to me. And Amanda? She had no legal claim. I remembered how James had looked at me with respect, admiration even, when he said, "Your father saw this coming, Alice. He wanted to make sure you were safe, that the house would stay with you, no matter what happened after he was gone." That knowledge had brought me peace in the days following. It was a small victory in the midst of a storm, a tiny shred of control I could hold on to. My father had known what was coming, and he had set everything up to protect me. He'd made sure I didn't have to fight for what was mine. But now, as I stood in the hallway looking at the empty rooms, I realized something else. I wasn't just fighting for the house. I was fighting for my father's memory, for the life we had here, for the love he had poured into every detail. And I wasn't going to let Amanda take that away from me, no matter how hard she tried. The phone call with Rebecca lingered in my mind, twisting and churning with each passing minute. How could she be so cold? How could she disregard everything my father had worked for, everything he had loved? The house was never just a building to him. It was his life, his legacy. And now she wanted to erase it. I couldn't understand her. I couldn't understand why someone who had come into our lives so late, someone who had barely known my father in his prime, could think she had any right to tear everything down. I was furious. As I sat in the living room, I glanced at the family portrait that hung above the fireplace, the one my father had taken years ago. It was a simple picture, but it was the one he had cherished the most, my mother, me, and him all together. My father had always said that we were his world, that we didn't need anything else. He had given us everything, his time, his energy, his love. And Rebecca? She had come in and tried to push us all out, to remake everything into something new, something that didn't include us. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I stood up, my hands clenching into fists. My anger was boiling over now. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about respect. It was about love. It was about the fact that she had dared to treat my father's memory as if it were nothing. How could she think she could get away with this? I walked over to the window and looked out at the garden, the one my father had lovingly tended for years. Those roses bloomed in bursts of red, standing tall despite everything that had happened. They were a symbol of his life, of his strength, of his ability to create something beautiful out of nothing, and now Rebecca wanted to destroy it. I could almost see her smirking, imagining herself sitting in a new house, one where my father's memory no longer held any power. She thought she had won, but she had no idea what she was up against. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. No, I wasn't going to let this happen, not without a fight. I grabbed my phone, dialing Mr. Harrison's number without hesitation. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm, yet filled with the quiet anticipation I had come to expect from him. "Hello, Alice," he said, a faint smile in his voice. "I was expecting you." I spoke to her, I said, my voice steady. "She's trying to sell the house. She's claiming it's hers to sell, that she has the right to do whatever she wants with it." There was a pause on the other end, and then Mr. Harrison's voice became serious. "I see, and what do you want to do about it?" I swallowed hard, feeling a rush of emotion flood through me. "I want to stop her," I said, my voice firm. "I want to make sure she can't just walk away with everything. She has no right to take what isn't hers." "Of course," Mr. Harrison replied. "I'll get in touch with the buyers immediately. We'll make sure they know the truth about the property and its rightful owner." A small spark of relief ignited inside me. This wasn't over yet. "We still had a chance. I'll need you to make sure they're aware of the legal situation. I don't want anyone to get caught up in this mess," I said, my tone softening slightly. "Consider it done," he assured me. "We'll handle everything." I hung up the phone and took a moment to breathe. The weight of the situation was starting to settle over me, but this time, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a step toward justice. My father had protected me, and now it was my turn to protect his legacy. I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to let Amanda walk away with what was mine. And I wasn't going to let her disrespect my father's memory any longer. The days after the call with Mr. Harrison felt like a blur. I moved through the house as though I were in a fog, each step heavier than the last. The roses outside the window bloomed in full force, their bright red petals contrasting the heaviness in my chest. The house that had once felt like a sanctuary now felt like a battleground, a place I had to defend from someone who had no right to take it. I spent hours on the phone, speaking with Mr. Harrison and going through legal documents I barely understood. Each conversation revealed new layers to the situation, but none of them made it any easier. The weight of what Rebecca had done and what she was trying to do was suffocating. I felt overwhelmed, trapped by forces I couldn't control. It wasn't just about the house. It was about my father, the man who had built this life for us, the man who had worked tirelessly to make sure I had everything I needed. His absence had left a gaping hole in my heart, and now it felt as though that hole was being deepened with every step Rebecca took toward claiming this place as her own. I sat in my father's study, the one room in the house that had always felt like his personal sanctuary. The shelves lined with books, the desk where he had worked late into the night, the chair where he had sat to write letters and read newspapers all felt so empty now. The air in the room was thick with dust, as though time had stopped the moment he left. I ran my fingers across the back of the chair, feeling the cool wood under my fingertips. The scent of the old leather, the musty pages of the bookset was all still here, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to fill the space he had left behind. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear down the walls of this house, to confront Rebecca and demand she leave. I wanted to do something, anything, to fix this. But every time I thought about it, I felt paralyzed by the enormity of it all. How could I stop her? How could I protect what was left of my father's legacy when it seemed like everyone was against me? I stood up and walked toward the window, staring out at the garden that had once been my father's pride and joy. The garden where we had spent hours together, planting roses, building trellises, and talking about life. He had loved this place. He had loved me, and now, all of that was being threatened by the woman who had come into our lives too late to understand any of it. I could feel my eyes sting with the weight of my tears, but I held them back. I had no room for weakness. Not now. Not when everything I cared about was on the line. The house was more than just walls and windows. It was the last piece of my father that I had left, and if I didn't fight for it, I would lose everything. The next few days were a whirlwind. I kept going through the motion seating, sleeping, pretending like everything was fine, but inside, I was a storm. The threat of losing the house, the final piece of my father's legacy, gnawed at me, making every task feel insignificant. I knew I needed to act, but I had to be careful. I couldn't let Rebecca see me scramble. I had to be calculated. I had to be patient. I spent the next few days buried in legal paperwork, consulting with Mr. Harrison whenever I could. It was clear that my father had been preparing for this. His foresight had been incredible. He'd seen through Rebecca's schemes long before she ever had the chance to act on them. It wasn't just a matter of securing the house. It was about protecting everything my father had worked for, everything he had loved, and now it was my turn to protect it. The more I learned, the more my confidence grew. Rebecca had made a critical mistake, one she didn't even know she'd made. My father had transferred the house into a trust, one that was completely in my name. Legally, Rebecca had no claim to it, and the documents we needed to prove it were in my hands. The trust wasn't just some piece of paper. It was my father's final act of love and protection. It was his way of ensuring that I would always have this house no matter what. I couldn't help but admire my father's wisdom. He had been a brilliant man, a man who understood the world better than anyone. He had known Rebecca's true nature, seen through her facade. He had protected me in a way that no one else could have. And now, it was my turn to honor that protection. I took a deep breath and stared out of the study window, the same window my father had looked out of countless times. The garden, still vibrant with roses, reminded me of everything I was fighting for. I wasn't just fighting for a house. I was fighting for my father's memory, for his love, for everything he had built and left behind. I wasn't going to let Rebecca destroy that. That evening, I called Mr. Harrison again. I needed to set the wheels in motion. It was time to make my move. "I'm ready," I said when he picked up the phone. "Let's do it." He didn't hesitate. "I'll get in touch with the buyer's lawyer and inform them of the situation. We'll make sure they understand the truth." The words brought me a sense of relief, but I knew this was just the beginning. Rebecca would fight back. She wouldn't give up without a fight. But I was ready. I had my father's trust. I had the legal ground to stand on, and I had something else that she didn't: patience. I wasn't going to rush into this. I knew that when it came to matters like these, timing was everything. I needed to let Rebecca reveal her hand, to make sure that her overconfidence and her greed would eventually work against her. The next day, I found myself sitting in the living room, the same room where my father had spent countless evenings reading the newspaper, discussing the world, and telling me stories about his childhood. Everything in the room felt alive with his presence. His chair sat in the corner, just where it always had been, waiting for him to return. But he never would. I took a moment to remember him. His laugh, his voice, his wisdom. He had taught me so much. But the most important lesson he had given me was about strength. True strength wasn't about shouting or fighting. It was about knowing when to stand your ground and when to wait. My father had always been the calm in the storm. He never acted in haste. He observed, he listened, and when the time was right, he made his move. I picked up the phone again, dialing Mr. Harrison's number. "The buyer's lawyer has been contacted," he told me, his voice steady. "We're making sure they understand everything." "Good," I replied. "I want to make sure Rebecca's intentions are clear. I don't want anyone else to get caught in this mess." "Don't worry, Alice," Mr. Harrison said. "We've got everything under control." The next few days felt like a waiting game. I spent my time going through the house, taking in every detail. The floors that my father had worked so hard to restore, the windows he had personally designed, the garden where we had spent so many afternoons together. It was all a part of him. And no matter what happened, no one could take that away from me. Then, the call came. Mr. Harrison had spoken to the buyer's lawyer. The deal was off. The buyers were backing out of the sale. They had been informed of the legal complications surrounding the property, and they were no longer interested. Rebecca's plan had unraveled. I could almost hear the silence on the other end of the phone as Mr. Harrison told me the news. For a moment, I simply sat there, absorbing the weight of the victory. Rebecca had lost. She had underestimated me, and she had underestimated my father's love for me. The news from Mr. Harrison felt surreal. I almost had to pinch myself to make sure it was real. Rebecca's plans, her entire scheme, had collapsed. She had thought she could erase my father's legacy, that she could take everything he had built and turn it into something else, something that suited her. But she had underestimated my father's foresight, and she had certainly underestimated me. I spent the next few hours in a daze, walking through the house, touching the things my father had loved, feeling the weight of his memory in every room. The house that once felt like it was slipping away now, felt like it was mine again. The air felt lighter, as though the house itself was breathing a sigh of relief. My father's presence was stronger than ever, and I felt a quiet peace settling over me. But I wasn't done yet. I walked outside and stood in the garden, my fingers brushing the petals of the roses my father had planted with such care. They bloomed as they always had, their deep red color standing in stark contrast to the green of the leaves. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, inhaling the familiar scent. This was the legacy my father had left behind. Not just a house, not just a piece of property, but a living, breathing testament to everything he had worked for. Rebecca's Mercedes pulled up the driveway, its tires crunching on the gravel, and I felt a small, vindictive smile tug at my lips. She had no idea what was coming. I could hear the click of her heels as she marched toward me, her steps fast and furious, her face twisted with frustration. She was clutching a crumpled letter in her hand, her eyes blazing with fury. I stayed seated in the garden, my hands calmly resting in my lap, as though I had all the time in the world. I wanted her to come to me. I wanted to see her face when the truth finally sank in. "You conniving little witch!" she screamed, thrusting the letter at me. The paper trembled in her grip. "You knew about this all along." I met her gaze, my voice calm, steady. "Knew about what, Rebecca?" Her eyes blazed, her face flushed with anger. "The trust, the property transfer. You and that lawyer, this was all a plan, wasn't it?" I didn't flinch. I rose slowly from my seat, brushing dirt from my jeans, and looked her dead in the eye. "No," I said quietly, my voice firm. "Dad and Mr. Harrison arranged it. I just followed his wishes." Rebecca's face contorted, a mixture of disbelief and rage flickering in her eyes. "Your father would never have done this to me. He trusted me." I tilted my head, my gaze unwavering. "Did he? Or did he just let you think he did?" Her mouth went dry, her eyes wide with shock. The color drained from her face as the reality began to sink in. She looked at me, then at the letter in her hand, her expression faltering. She was starting to realize that everything she thought she hated, everything she had tried to claim was slipping through her fingers. The house was never in his name, I continued, my voice steady. He transferred it to a trust years ago. I'm the sole beneficiary. You had no right to sell it. She took a step back, her hand trembling, the letter crumpling even more in her grasp. You're lying, she whispered, but the doubt in her eyes was unmistakable. Check the property records, I said softly, my tone almost kind. They're public. Dad made sure everything was transparent when the time came. Her breath hitched, and I could see her calculating, trying to figure out her next move. She took a step back, her heels sinking into the soft earth of the garden, as though she were trying to retreat from the truth that was bearing down on her. The buyers are threatening legal action, she said, her voice breaking. Do you know how humiliating this is? I nodded, unfazed. Almost as humiliating as trying to throw me out of my own house. Or pretending to care about my father just to get his money. Her eyes flashed with anger, but she couldn't hide the panic creeping in. She recoiled as if my words had physically struck her. You don't understand my relationship with him, she snapped. I stepped closer, my voice low but firm. Oh, I understand more than you think. Dad told me everything about the prenup, the withdrawals from his accounts, the men you met while he was in the hospital. She took a sharp intake of breath, her eyes widening with shock. He knew, she whispered. I nodded, my voice cold. He knew everything. He waited, watched, and planned. Like father, like daughter. For the first time, Rebecca was speechless. Her shoulders slumped, the weight of defeat sinking in. I pulled my phone from my pocket and held it up, the screen lighting up with the video I had recorded earlier. I've got this on tape, I said, my voice calm. Want me to add it to the file Mr. Harrison is building about your fraud? Her eyes darted to the phone, and I could see the panic flashing in her eyes. You wouldn't, she hissed, her voice full of desperation. I smiled, channeling the quiet strength my father had taught me. Try me. Rebecca took a step back, her hands trembling as she looked at me one last time, the reality of her loss sinking in. This isn't over, she threatened weakly. I looked at her, my voice final. It is. Leave the house. Leave me alone. Leave Dad's memory alone. Try anything else, and everything comes out, the affairs, the money, all of it. Her eyes searched mine, but there was nothing left for her to hold on to. She turned and stormed off, leaving the letter behind in the garden, fluttering to the ground. I picked it up, smoothing the creases, and slid it into my pocket. As I stood there watching her drive away, I realized the victory wasn't in the confrontation. It wasn't in seeing her retreat with nothing but humiliation. The real victory was in the silence that followed the peace of knowing that my father's legacy was safe, and that I had done everything in my power to protect it. The days following Rebecca's departure felt different. The house, once filled with tension and dread, now seemed lighter, almost as if it had been holding its breath for years and was finally allowed to exhale. The air was quieter, the rooms felt fuller, and my heart, for the first time in a long while, wasn't burdened with anger or fear. I spent the following days restoring the house, reclaiming every space that Rebecca had tried to change. I repaired the details that had been tampered with, repainting the walls in the soft blue my father had chosen, rehanging the curtains we had picked out together. Each stroke of the brush, each adjustment to the room, felt like an act of love, a reclaiming of what was rightfully mine, a way of honoring my father's memory and the life we had shared here. I returned to the garden, the place where my father had spent countless hours, tending to the roses with a care that was almost reverent. The flowers had bloomed brightly, their scent thick in the air. I knelt down, touching the soil, feeling a connection to my father that ran deeper than anything physical. It wasn't just the house or the land, it was the love, the history, the bond that had been formed here. It was the legacy my father had built, and now it was mine to protect. I looked at the garden, the roses swaying gently in the breeze, and for a moment, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for so long. My father had prepared me for this moment, teaching me the power of patience, of restraint. I hadn't had to fight. I had simply let the truth come to light, and in the end, it was the truth that had won. I took a deep breath, the scent of the roses filling my lungs. I felt my father's presence, almost as if he were standing next to me, proud of the woman I had become. The journey wasn't over there, would always be challenges, always people who would try to take what wasn't theirs. But I knew now that I was ready. I had his strength in me, his wisdom, and his love. And as I stood in that garden, surrounded by the roses, I knew I would never let go of the legacy he had left me. With the last of the sunlight filtering through the branches above, I whispered softly to myself, "We did it, Dad."